What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for Thursday's edition. Lot to get to on today's episode, people. So I want to get right to it, but make sure you got your cash out because we are making some money on today's episodes, looking at some trade rumors and everything else from the world of fantasy hockey. Let's get this money.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back inside the lab, everybody. That is the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, alongside my esteemed and distinguished co-host, Mr. Steele Roden. I am your boy, Big Flip Livingstone, holding it down for all of you fantasy fanatics out there. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for making us your first listen every single day. We appreciate that very much. I can't say it enough, but I'll continue to do so because that's who we are. On today's episode, my friends, a lot to get to from the world of fantasy hockey. You know what you can expect. More fire content, more big-time bets coming up at the end of the episode. Steele is picking up steam once again. I had a decent night. Let's go, people. We're trying to make this Christmas money because Santa Claus is coming very quick, or whoever else you celebrate. But you're going to need some holiday money, and that's what we will get to at the end of the episode. To kick it off, though, Steele, we have a little trade rumors out of the San Jose Sharks potentially moving Erik Karlsson. We're going to take a look at that. And on the heels of those trade rumors, we're going to take a look at some players on some not so good starts, some cold streaks that might benefit, that might skyrocket in fantasy value if they do move to a new scene. We're going to take a look at that angle. But let's start this show, Steele. The leader in goals for Blue Liners, the leader in points for Blue Liners is none other than your dark horse bounce back candidate in the offseason, Mr. Erik Karlsson. Let's talk about it because General Manager Mike Grier of the San Jose Sharks came out yesterday and said he will be entertaining offers for Mr. Erik Karlsson. Let's talk about it. What do you think about this? I know you've had your eye on Mr. Erik Karlsson for a while now.
Yeah, I think for the San Jose Sharks organization, I think it's about just being open to any possibility out there, especially in this transition of trying to rebuild their organization from the ground up. It looks like, they have a lot of older players on their team looking to rebuild under some of the younger guys they have locked up for a little while as well. So I think anything is possible. It is a long shot nonetheless for Erik Karlsson to be moved, especially on the contract that he's on, $11.5 million for the next 4 years. There's only three players higher than him, McDavid, Matthews, and Artemi Panarin, who have higher contracts than him. So it's going to be very difficult for the San Jose Sharks, or for that matter, any other team, to try to make a trade for Erik Karlsson because of the contract, the size of the contract there. But even just looking at Karlsson himself, he was at one point the best offensive defenseman probably 4 to 5 years ago. Without a question, by a mile, he was the
right
best.
there, yeah.
Since 2017, he hasn't been able to play more than 56 games. So the big question is this sustainable? Can he continue to put up these type of numbers? I think we can all agree that Karlsson is not going to be able to continue putting up the stats that he's put up, 10 goals, 24 points in 18 games so far this season. It's going to fall off a little bit, but can he sustain that? Can he be consistent with the underlying peripheral stats that he's been doing as well? Because the shots, the block, the hits, they've been pretty great as well. Obviously, the point production is great too, but it's just a very difficult situation, especially for other teams financially, to try to figure it out. The Sharks might retain 50% on 50% of it. Maybe they get a third party to take on a little bit more of that as well. It's just such a big contract, but at least Mike Grier is open with the consideration of trading him as well.
Couple ways that I like to take this conversation, Steele. Number one, he also has a no movement clause, making things a little bit more difficult. The power lies in his hands. He's also fourth in the NHL in points total, which is just downright impressive. He has been good. Your points hold value and truth, though, because there is absolutely no way that he can keep up this pace. But even stays kind of close to this pace, the San Jose Sharks are going to have multiple teams calling on this player. That's a fact. And if Erik Karlsson gets dealt to a team Like, if he's getting this done with the San Jose Sharks, I'm very intrigued to see what he can do on a winner. There are some rumors, though, coming out of the Ottawa Senators about them looking to acquire a defenseman. Nothing related to Erik Karlsson as of yet. We're not going to speculate. But the fact remains, Pierre Dorion came out and is looking to make a move. And when you look at their blue line, obviously they need some help. They have Bernard Docker stepping up. He's going to eat more minutes. Jake Sanderson's been pretty solid. He's going to have to eat more minutes. But this player is playing way too good still, and there's going to be some interested parties. I don't know if it's going to be the Ottawa Senators, but I do know this. If he even is able to go at 75% of what he's been doing, he is going to move to a winner at some point, and his value will then continue to rise, in my opinion. I know, how could he be better? How could he even get more value than he has right now? You never know if he goes to a situation where he has less minutes and more opportunity to play with some studs. That's what we're going to talk about around the break, is some players on cold starts, bad starts, that if they move somewhere else, their fantasy value skyrockets. You got to keep an eye on some of these situations, because that's how you pounce and make the money, Steele. Where else you're making that money? You know where it is, baby. It's from our friends at betonline.net, because today's episode is brought to you by betonline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, they have it all for you at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts just like this one, you can find even more over at BetOnline. We're always the fastest and easiest way to find your betting fix is BetOnline. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. For your next listen, though, please go check out Locked On Sports Day podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. And please make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button. You'll get all the latest episodes. And Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode. Flip, though, we're on the conversation about potential trade rumors, talking about Erik Karlsson.
Yes, sir.
Let's get into the scenario of some of these players right now who just really aren't living up to expectation. Very slow start with either a new team or their current organization right now. I'll throw it over to you to kick us off here.
Please.
What is the first player you think could really benefit from either a trade or just a different look inside his own organization?
Yeah, I'm looking at these because there is no solidified recent trade rumors, but a couple of the players that I'm looking at, especially this first one in Patrick Kane, we know that there has been a lot of rumors out there about him potentially moving. So to me, this is not a stretch, especially when you see what's happening in Chicago this season. As much as I've heard what we've heard from Patrick Kane and him saying there was no real interest in him moving, I don't fully believe it, just because of also what I've seen from him over the past handful of games. He just looks dejected out there. He's playing alongside Philip Kurashev and Max Domi right now. I could just see this guy going to a winner like the New York Rangers or something like that, and all of a sudden his 2 goals that he has this season, you know he's going to get his if he goes to a winner. This is a player that you have to have your eye on out there, and you might even be able to get him at a quote-unquote low-buy-low situation right now because he only has 2 goals. I know he has 10 assists and still 12 points in 15 games, but only 2 of those over the last 6. He's struggling a bit right now. He's starting to lose interest. The Chicago Blackhawks are starting to lose games with even more regularity. I don't know, Steele. This is one of those situations where, again, we're not speculating on saying go out there and start adding Patrick Kane right now. But you got to maybe start maneuvering and positioning yourselves to maybe adding these guys while their value is down. That might make a move at some point, because teams are sniffing around Patrick Kane's situation. I think one thing that I would like to mention before you take the mic back, Steele, is you got to take a look at the contract situation. His contract is coming up. He will be a UFA. Teams will be sniffing around to make him an addition and try and make him stick around. So Patrick Kane is a player that you need to keep your eye on, because his value will skyrocket if he moves.
Yeah, and if he does move, that team that eventually gets him is going to try to lock him up for the next, 4, 5, even 6 years. Because like you said, he's only 32 years old. He's got a ton of gas left in the tank. So that is a good player to look at right now and potentially try to make a trade to acquire him for your fantasy team. I'm looking at the opposite end of the spectrum. A couple of young players who just have not really found success so far with their organization. And these are guys that I think that can be, once they are traded or moved on, they can have some pretty decent NHL careers ahead of them. But for their current team that they're on, I believe it's over for them and they need to change it up. The first guy I'm looking at, though, is Jesse Puljujarvi from the Edmonton Oilers. Absolutely brutal. Yeah. Brutal. He's been terrible so far for the Oilers. Owned at 4% on Yahoo and 2.5% on ESPN. To me, I'm actually shocked that it's even that high. I think it is if he had 0 in both leagues. But 1 goal, 3 points in 16 games for Puljujarvi. 24 shots and 35 hits. It's not bad for those underlying stats, but just the point production's been awful, especially when you consider the fact that he's been playing on the top line or the second line with either Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl. And you're going to tell me that you only have 3 points. McDavid has 15 goals and 32 assists. Now, I understand that a lot, half of those have been on the power play. To be specific, 17 of those points have been even strength. And so Puljujarvi is not even on the first power play unit. So 17 of those points are on the 5-on-5. You're playing alongside both of those guys. How the heck do you only have 3 points? To me, it makes no sense. The fact that his contract is at $3 million as well, it's just terrible. He's 24 years old. He had a career high of 36 points last year. For me, he's not cutting it with the Edmonton Oilers. No. I think the Oilers really do need to move on from him. And it's just sad to see, especially from the guy who was a fourth overall pick, 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's really it with this player. And I would say what you're getting at is accurate. I would be concerned about any team out there wanting to acquire this guy, but I could see what you're describing feels so accurate with this player. He is done with the Edmonton Oilers. He had been back to Europe and back and forth, trade demands and whatnot, on and off ice issues with this player in Edmonton. And I think if not for, their thin right side and winger situation with Evander Kane going down, you might be hearing more about, the disappointment of him again this season, because if he can't get it done with McDavid, who can he get it done with? But I could see his value. He's just got too much good things going on with his, on paper makeup. Can he translate onto that to the ice? Obviously, lately the answer is no, but if he ever does get it going in a new situation, he's going to be valuable. They don't miss usually that often, that high in the draft these days. Yeah. It happens sometimes. It looks like it's continuing to happen right now with Jesse Puljujarvi. Let me go back to another veteran a guy who moved teams in the offseason, Steele. I have one more guy after this. Then we're going to get to big-time bets, which are heating up. People stay tuned for that. Is a guy who is on pace for a career low 41 points in John Klingberg. He moves to the Anaheim Ducks. You thought he might be a steadying veteran presence. The Ducks just have nothing good going on right now. I know they just beat the Detroit Red Wings in overtime. That was a good game. Tough loss for me and Steele. That one cost us both some money. Not going to go down that rabbit hole. 1 goal and 7 assists so far. I just see Klingberg and his quality on offense. Say what you want to say about defense. Say what you want to say about what he does for his team's value. But what he does fantasy-wise each year is 41 assists, 50 points, 56 points, 58 points, topping out at 67 points. He's been a consistent fantasy piece, and to see him only with 7 assists and 8 points right now, I can't help but feel that if someone took a flyer on this veteran offensive piece to move to a team that scores some goals, man, John Klingberg, I think his value would go way up. And I actually think if the Ducks continue to play bad, I could see Klingberg being moved before the deadline. That's just me speculating, but he just screams deadline ad for a team going to the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of funny because John Klingberg was one of those guys that I thought was a droppable player for fantasy teams alongside Michael Bunting. Yep. And what would you know? Michael Bunting goes out and gets 2 goals, 1 assist against the Penguins, and John Klingberg gets a goal and an assist.
Yes, he did.
Apparently they're listening. They didn't like what I had to say about them, so they turned up the Jets a little bit. But
But you know
nonetheless,
what I'm saying here with Klingberg,
I,
right? He
I, I
seems out of
agree.
it
I
where he's
agree
playing.
with I
Thank you.
completely agree with what you're saying right now.
Love
I
it.
think he might get traded before the deadline as well.
Yeah.
February sometime, and just try to figure some things out with a new club.
Also, a
Unfortunate for
UFA coming up, Steele. So a perfect little deadline edition rental.
another UFA, but I'm going to go again back to another young
That's
European player that I really just think needs to cut his losses, or the team needs to cut their losses with this player, and that's Jesperi Kotkiniemi with the Carolina Hurricanes, owned at 2% on Yahoo, 5.1% on ESPN. This is another guy who was a first-round, third overall pick just a few years ago, 22 years old. He's playing on his second NHL team to start his fifth season in the NHL as well. And alongside Puljujarvi, he's got 1 goal and 3 points in 16 games. The exact same stats, except he has less shots, less hits, and less blocks. Yep. And again, he's playing on the second line right now. He's centering the second line for the Hurricanes. He's between Martin Necas, who's been absolutely phenomenal this year, and Andrei Svechnikov as well. So
also
the fact
really
that
good.
He's only got 3 points on the season in 16 games. It
Yep.
doesn't make any sense. And the reason why I'm highlighting these two players is because we just saw an absolute boost from Kirby Dach after he got traded from the Chicago Blackhawks to the Montreal Canadiens.
Yes.
He's also one of these young players who wasn't really flourishing with the club he got
How about
drafted
Dominik
by.
Kubalik?
Exactly. Another young guy who's getting a new start with a new club, and he's blossoming right now. So I'm trying to highlight these young guys right now. And I bring up Kirby Dach because he's got 4 goals, 14 points in 14 games with a new club. And he's playing great alongside other young players right now.
Top 5 pick.
Top 5 pick. So for me, I'm highlighting Kirby Dach and Kotkiniemi and Puljujarvi because these are young guys who I really think can have a bright future in the NHL. But like Kirby Dach, those two guys need to find a new club and a new club fast because it's just not working out with the Hurricanes and Oilers.
100%, my man. I really appreciate these takes that you're bringing. You've been on point all week. What else is new? That's why you're my co-host. That's why we do this show together. Shout out to all the listeners and supporters out there. We see you. But also, Steele, to finish off your point on that player, Kotkiniemi, I agree with you 100%. And I also agree with what you're talking about with these young players. And I think the takeaway here for all your fantasy listeners out there is to not give up on some of these guys. And as much as Steele mentioned John Klingberg as a drop option, if he continues to pop multiple points, this might be another buy low situation for all of these players. That might be the takeaway. Don't sleep on any of them, because now that I'm looking at my last player in Anthony Beauvillier, he feels like a guy who needs a change of scenery as well, Steele. He just seemingly year in and year out continues to get all these opportunities in the top 6. And you're talking about a guy having a really good year on a line in Edmonton with Connor McDavid. I know Brock Nelson is not Connor McDavid, but with Anthony Beauvillier having no points in the last 7 games and Brock Nelson on a heater, his line mate, what is Beauvillier doing? And he has been one of those, sleeper X factor kind of guys for the last how many years, Steele, have we talked about Beauvillier coming into the season as one of those guys who should pop off this year? 3 goals, 4 assists, I understand is still something. I think with a change of scenery, he could actually do something more than his 48, 49 points that he seems to do every year, which I know is still a quality NHLer. But this was a player who was supposed to do a lot more for a guy who was selected 28th overall. There's a theme here, Steele. Don't give up on these guys that have proven track records like Patrick Kane, or have limited track records and have been taken at the top of the draft. Because if you don't trust us, trust the guys that get paid to draft these players and watch them for a living. And that's all you really need to know. I hope that you've enjoyed that segment, people, because the one that pays the bills.
The one thing I want to say about
Please
Anthony Beauvillier, though, is I do like this player a lot. I think he does have a lot to offer, especially at age 25. He's still a young guy, but he only has a career high of 39 points. He's a consistent 30 to 40.
My bad. I was saying 48, 47. It was 38.
I know. It's all. I got your back with the math, bro. Don't worry about it. But he's a consistent 30 to 40-year point. He's a great depth player, but I think you're actually hitting the nail right on the head here. A change of scenery for a guy like Anthony Beauvillier might really benefit his game and benefit a new club. And, I think a lot of teams would actually be very interested in a guy like Beauvillier. So I think the Islanders could get a decent amount in return if they were to trade him, at some point in the season. So I like that guy a lot, and I think you're making a good point of
Appreciate that.
Beauvillier getting a new scene.
New scene, new lease on life, and his value would skyrocket fantasy wise. That was the take with all of the guys we were looking at. A couple of them actually had already been rumored to potentially be on the move in Patrick Kane. You've heard rumblings about Klingberg before. Beauvillier hasn't been happy. The two players you mentioned, Steele, who knows? Puljujarvi is definitely a candidate to be moved. Should Evander Kane come back even any time near the end of the season? Big question marks abound there. We won't speculate because that's not what we do, but we do bring that fire, and that's what's coming up around the break with big time bets. You know where my brain's at, though.
Money's on the mind, baby. Money's on the mind. But we got to thank everyone out there so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. And in return, because of that, hitting subscribe, hit the follow button. We're going to try to make some money all for you out there. With our big time bets and the lock of the night. Flip, if you don't mind, I'd like to kick us off real quick.
I think you have to because I'm going back to the well, baby, with the big flip triple dip.
All right.
So please take it away.
Perfect. So I'm going to start a little frisky here. I'm looking at that Rangers Kraken game.
Ooh.
As of right now, the over is at 6 goals even, and it's at plus 105. I think that's a big money right there. You've been getting some great offense from the Seattle Kraken. The power play, the special teams for the New York Rangers has been absolutely phenomenal. That's pretty much where Zibanejad gets 95% of his goals, it seems like. So if they can get on the power play a few times as well, I could see this being a very high scoring game. So I'm going to take the over 6 goals at plus 105 for my first pick of the night.
Absolutely love it. If you don't mind, just keep going, my friend, and I'll finish with all 3 of mine.
All right, perfect. Next one, I'm also leaning over to the Penguins on the money line at minus 105 versus the Minnesota Wild. We talked about this a little bit, before we hopped on here. Marc-Andre Fleury, it looks like he will be out for at least one game with an upper body injury.
Yep.
As well, I'm taking the Penguins on the money line because the Wild have just not been scoring a ton of goals recently. They only have 4 goals in their last 3 games, and they're 1-2-0 in that, or 1-1-1 in that time as well. So just hasn't been a great 3-4 game stretch for the Minnesota Wild. Not a ton of goals offensively, and without Marc-Andre Fleury, I think the Pittsburgh Penguins take this one on the money line at minus 105. But my lock of the night, I'm taking the Avalanche on the money line at plus 105 against the Carolina Hurricanes on the road. I think Mikko Rantanen, Nathan McKinnon, especially Cale Makar, Georgiev has looked phenomenal so far. I'm going to take the reigning Stanley Cup champions plus 105 on the road for my lock of the night.
I don't hate your Penguins angle at all. I actually like it because they got smacked around by the Toronto Maple Leafs that I'm going to talk about in a quick sec just the other night. So the Penguins need to figure it out in a hurry because that Metro division is getting very good on top of them. And, as much as we did like what was going on in Pittsburgh, Evgeny Malkin has been good. We liked the Tristan Jarry season last year. They better figure it out in a hurry, Steele, because we're running out of time for that buffer zone of losing too many games. And their 6-game losing streak is obviously not doing them any favors. But let me do you a favor and go back to what we were doing real good last season. And I was hitting 3 picks from 1 game. This time, I'm not going to be parlaying them because I like them so much. I'm going to be betting them individually. Let me start off with my first pick, which is Austin Matthews anytime goal. And I want to explain it this way. What I've seen with the shuffling of the lines in Toronto, with John Tavares being partnered up with Mitch Marner more often and Willie Nylander being played with Austin Matthews a little bit more, now what you're seeing is Tavares and Marner being able to take the pressure off of Matthews a little bit, and now they're starting to really go, those two. Willie's picking up steam as well. When those 3 go, Matthews tends to be able to get that little bit of extra space that he needs to just go off. I think that's what we're going to see. I called a good streak for the Leafs at the end of last week, and they've done it for me 2 in a row, and I'm going to continue to go back to them while they are playing good hockey. Austin Matthews, anytime goal, pick number 1. The New Jersey Devils roll into town. Let's talk about how hot they have been and how many goals they're scoring. Toronto Maple Leafs also starting to pick up steam on the offensive front. I don't need to explain this one much more. We have 2 loaded offensive teams starting to click. over 6.5 at -117. That's my second one. And to cap it all off, you know where this is going. My lock of the night, the Toronto Maple Leafs on the money line, -140 to cap the triple dip. They are starting to play good hockey. And if not for the Boston Bruins, they'd be on top in the Atlantic Division. And I know we gave them their heat, but they are finally starting to play their game, which is dominating the offensive circle, dominating the faceoff dot, and outscoring your opponent. Oh, how about the last 10 games between these two? 9-1 for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They have played very well against the Devils over the last couple of seasons. That's the big flip triple dip steal. My lock of the night, Leafs on the money line -140. Give me the over in that game, as well as Austin Matthews anytime goal. I need a water.
I absolutely love the flip triple dip,
Woo!
and I think I love more the lock of the night because I think it would be just a cherry on top to see the Devils win streak come to an end. Even though they've been absolutely fantastic, and I wish them all the best, maybe even a playoff run, who knows how good they've been, but snap a win streak would be absolutely fantastic, especially
They've
coming
also
from the Toronto
lost
Maple Leafs.
6 in a row in Toronto. Now I'm done with the stats.
All right, perfect. So it's bound to hit. I love it as well. I might throw that on parlay for myself too. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Once again, please make your second listen Locked On Sports Today podcast. Biggest stories, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Please make sure you hit the subscribe and the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's podcast with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.